and subdued them. And David took Metheg-Ammah from the hand of the Philistines. And then there's a reference over in 1 Chronicles 18:1. Basically says same things, but it says in there that he also took Gath and its towns, and as well as the place that we just mentioned here. As we said last week, the Philistines, and you look at the map that I just handed you this evening for those who are here, you'll see the Philistines at the time of David, and you see a line drawn there. That's how far that was the territory of the Philistines, and they had actually come further into the country. Okay, but when David conquered them, he actually took Gath, which shows in the map there. Okay, so he actually reduced their territory. Okay, their territory was actually reduced under David's reign. I mentioned last week too that King Saul was always on the defensive. Okay, he was always trying to keep the Philistines at bay and to try to conquer them and force them back into their territory. But under David's reign, he went on the offensive. And so he went after them and removed them from the land, and then also took part of their territory. So that was interesting to note as we get started into David's campaigns. All right. If you look at, if you go to page 34 in your notes, you'll see we're going to talk about the east and Moab. Okay, dealing with Moab, so we're in chapter 8 and verse 2. It says, "Then he defeated Moab, forcing them down to the ground. He measured them off with a line. With 2 lines he measured off those to be put to death, and with 1 full line those to be kept alive. So the Moabites became David's servants and brought tribute." And then over in 1 Chronicles 18, you might want to put a marker or something there. We'll be going back and forth between these 2 chapters this evening. In verse 2, it says, "Then he defeated Moab, and the Moabites became David's servants and brought tribute." So very similar information. What do you know about the Moabites? And you'll see on the map that I gave you this evening, you'll see the different nations on that map, of particularly the one King David's military victories. I printed this out so that you could see where these different nations were positioned around Israel. Okay? So what do you know about the Moabites? What's their history from the scriptures that we know?
Started with an incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters.
Yes, right. Each of the 2 daughters had a child who became, and then the Moabites became the Moabites. Okay, and the other group was the
Ammonites.
Ammonites. Yes. Okay. All right. So that's the history. Now, I wrote here. Or if you look in 1 Samuel 14, verse 47. We want to give a little bit of history of this people. 1 Samuel 14:47 says, "So Saul established his sovereignty over Israel and fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the people of Ammon, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he harassed them." Okay. "And he gathered an army and attacked the Amalekites." Okay, that's something else. Okay, that's all right. So Saul was obviously an enemy of the Moabites. Okay, it says he harassed them. Okay, but you find as we go along here that the Moabites had actually been friendly to David initially when he came to the throne because they thought he was Saul's enemy. Okay, they didn't understand, obviously. So how was David actually related to the Moabites?
Through his great-grandma.
Through his great-grandmother, Ruth. Okay, so here we have a family connection, okay, a much more direct one than through Lot's daughter, okay. And I had the question here, and we've already answered, how were the Moabites related to the Jews? They were, Abraham's nephew Lot was the father of the Moabites, okay. So why was God opposed to the Moabites? We have to go back as a reference. I'm not going to go there because we're not going to read those 3 chapters, but Numbers 22 to 25 gives a story about a very interesting person. And this is what caused God to turn against the Moabites. Ever heard of Balaam? And what did the Moabites do with regards in regards to Balaam?
It's false gods that they were worshiping.
Okay, yes, that's true. Okay, he wanted to, okay, they actually hired him. Okay, what did they want him to do?
They wanted him to curse Israel.
Right, okay. They wanted Balaam to put a curse on Israel, okay, but that didn't work. But what did he actually accomplish to cause problems in Israel?
He gave them advice.
Uh-huh.
And they had their daughters go and flirt with Israeli men, and then eventually
Seduce them.
seduce them. Yeah.
Yes, that was what it was. So he told the leaders of the Moabites, okay, what you do is you get your daughters to seduce the Israelite men to marry Moabite women, and you can destroy the nation through this intermarriage. Okay, and so thinking ahead to David, given that, why would David now attack the Moabites? You're not going to find anything particular in Scripture. I'll just give you the information. Tradition holds that David's attitude changed when the Moabites deceived David, resulting in the death of his parents. Okay, well, I'm going to give you a little more information on that in a bit. Okay, and here we read in 2 Samuel, David only allowed 1/3 of Moab's army to survive, and the nation was forced to pay tribute to David from that day on. Okay, so he allowed some to live. Okay, all right. At any rate, so he recognized, that the Moabites had actually sheltered David's parents when he was running from Saul. Okay, he had sent his family into Moab for protection because he was afraid that Saul, as is quite typical in those situations, if you're chasing one person, you go after their family. Okay, and so he was protecting his family, and the Moabites provided that protection while he was fleeing from Saul. And on that basis, then the tradition is they believed that the Moabites then thought that they were friends with David and an enemy of Saul. Okay, and caused them, but now they attack. Okay, and so they pay the price. Okay, so David subdues them, and they become his servants, and they have to pay him tribute. So a part of all that they raise by way of crops and cattle or whatever, they had to give him a portion. Okay, so that takes care of the Moabites who were on the east side. Looking to the north, we have the Arameans and Syrians, which is a confederacy of nations at that time. Actually, the Arameans and the Syrians were actually one group at that time. They were not separate groups. They were one group, okay? And so they're listed, that's why they're mentioned together. So looking at 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel 8, starting in verse 3, reading down to verse 8, David also defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Zobah, as he went to recover his territory at the river Euphrates. So the river Euphrates goes right up over the north of Israel. David took from him 1,000 chariots, 700 horsemen, and 20,000 foot soldiers. Also David hamstrung all the chariot horses, except that he spared enough of them for 100 chariots. When the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 of the Syrians. Then David put garrisons in Syria of Damascus, and the Syrians became David's servants and brought tribute. So the Lord preserved David wherever he went. And David took the shields of gold that had belonged to the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. Also from Betah and from Berothai, cities of Hadadezer, King David took a large amount of bronze. Okay, I mean, this is going to come up much later in our study, obviously, but what became of that gold and bronze? I mean, he took it back to Jerusalem.
It probably went into the temple.
Yeah, it was actually melted down and used in the furnishing of the temple in the future. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, so if we look on the map here, you have you can see on the one map there the Assyrian Empire, and you see Damascus up there. Okay. Anyways, the Zobah was located to the north of Damascus and was part of a confederacy of nations called the Syrians. More accurately, they are the Arameans. David's victory over Hadadezer helped secure the northern borders of Israel and provided a buffer zone from enemies that were further north. Okay. The whole area north to the Euphrates River came under David's authority. This gave Israel important military installations, as it says he actually installed installations, okay, in the northern part of that territory. And it gave them the control of the caravan routes. That's very interesting. Okay, so they control who comes into the country and who goes out. This secured Israel's northern border and provided a buffer zone. I guess I repeated my statement from before, from enemies to the north. And I wrote the question here, and we've already answered it. What did David do with the gold and bronze? He took it to Jerusalem, and it was going to be used in the temple in the future. Okay, going on to verses 9 to 14. Okay, when Toi, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated all the army of Hadadezer, then Toi sent Joram his son to King David to greet him and bless him, because he had fought against Hadadezer and defeated him, for Hadadezer had been at war with Toi. And Joram brought with him articles of silver, articles of gold, and articles of bronze. King David also dedicated these to the Lord, along with the silver and gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he had subdued, from Syria, from Moab, from the people of Ammon, from the Philistines, from Amalek, and from the spoil of Hadadezer, the son of Rehob, king of Jobah. And David made himself a name when he returned from killing 18,000 Syrians in the Valley of Salt. He also put garrisons in Edom. Okay, so that wasn't there before. When he conquered Edom, he also put garrisons there. Throughout all Edom, he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went. Okay. All right, and going over to 1 Chronicles 18, verses 9 to 11. Okay, it says, now when it says 2 here, king of Hamath heard that David had defeated all the army of Hadadezer, king of Zobah, he sent Hadoram, his son, to King David to greet him and bless him because he had fought against Hadadezer and defeated him. For Hadadezer had been at war with you get different spellings sometimes of people's names, okay? And Hadoram brought with him all kinds of articles of gold, silver, and bronze. King David also dedicated these to the Lord, along with the silver and gold that he had brought from all these nations, from Edom, from Moab, from the people of Ammon, from the Philistines, and from Amalek. Okay. Moreover, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, killed 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt. He also put garrisons in Edom, and all the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went. Okay, so what is the relationship between David and Toi, king of Hamath? Just so you know, I think we already mentioned that. If you look at the map there on the right side of the page I handed out this evening, you see Damascus in that green section, okay, in the northern part. And Hamath was actually above that. Okay, so it was a different territory. Okay, so what is now the relationship between David and Toi, king of Hamath?
It would seem like they were friends.
Yes.
At least
Yes.
they weren't warring.
Right. What did Hamath do? He sent his son as an envoy, like an ambassador, okay? And they brought all kinds of gifts to David, okay? So they became, I think it's more than friends. I think they became allies, because it said that he had been fighting against Hadadezer, but David took care of Hadadezer. Okay, so he's conquered his enemy, David's enemy and his enemy, okay? And so he now wants to become an ally. Okay, probably for good, with good reason.
Because no matter where David went, he just cleaned clock as he went, no matter what.
Yes. Yeah, he hadn't seen any defeats. He had taken care of the Philistines, he's taken care of the Edomites. It mentions in the verses we read here, he took care of the Ammonites, the Amalekites, okay? All of his enemies are getting defeated. And so it probably was a wise move to become an ally to David. And it doesn't say it, but they might even have signed a treaty, okay?
Expensive one, but a treaty.
Oh, yes. And I mean, that kind of explains all that he gave to David, okay? It's kind of like, okay, let's appease this guy. We don't want to cause him any trouble, okay? You don't turn away. If David could have turned him back, okay, but he didn't. He received it, okay? Which in Eastern culture, if you receive a gift, if you take it, you are now in a relationship with that person, okay? And you won't turn against them, at least unless something really dramatic happens. Okay?
So would it seem possible or logical, maybe, that David was aware of what the borders were that God had first said to Abraham?
Yes.
And
You're ahead of me, but you're right. You're right. Where the border was to be what? The original border given, the northern border given to Abraham was to what place?
The Euphrates.
To the Euphrates, and he's there. Okay, now he's at the Euphrates. Okay, doesn't mean he couldn't be attacked by nations above the Euphrates. And so he sets up garrisons right in that territory along the Euphrates to protect the nation, okay? And by making probably a treaty, okay, with Hamath, you know, he's guaranteeing that the border is secure, okay? So it's probably, as I put down here, Toy probably subjected himself to David's rule, probably to save himself. Of course, we don't know whether David would actually have advanced his army any further than the Euphrates, being I think in his heart, he was getting the territory back that had been promised to the nation, okay? And he may not have given the northern nations above the Euphrates any problem at all, except don't touch
Leave
me.
me alone.
Yeah, don't touch me. You know, and that's why he put the garrisons up, okay? All right. Going back to chapter 8 of 2 Samuel, looking at verses 11 and 12, okay, says, King David also dedicated these to the Lord, all these things that he got from Toy, along with the silver and gold that he had dedicated from all the nations which he had subdued. Okay, so what was David careful to do?
He dedicated the spoil to the Lord rather than to Israel or to himself?
Yeah, he didn't take them for himself. What is he recognizing?
He's recognizing that it's the Lord that has won the battles, not his armies.
Yeah, it's not him and it's not his armies that he's, by giving these to the Lord, these really belong to you, Lord. You're the one, okay? And the verses we read there even say that the Lord blessed him wherever he went, okay? And I think David was very cognizant of the fact that his victories came from the Lord, okay? I mean, consider the armies that he had just defeated with their chariots and horses and all their weaponry. David didn't have that kind of power, okay, or military might, okay? And so I think he recognizes if there's any victory, it's because the Lord gave it to us, okay? All right, so that takes care, we've talked about the west side with the Philistines. We've taken care of part of the east side. And now we want to look at the south, okay, with the Edomites, okay? We've dealt with the Moabites. Now we're looking at the Edomites, and you can see where they were positioned on the map there that I handed out this evening. Let's look at verse 14, okay? We read that already, but we'll read it again. He also put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom, he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went. So we have, it's kind of the same thing as with the Moabites. Okay, the Moabites have been conquered, the Edomites have been conquered. And then looking at 1 Chronicles 18, verses 12 and 13. Okay, it says, moreover, and we read these before, but it's worth reading again. Moreover, Abishai the son of Zeruiah killed 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt. He also put garrisons in Edom, and all the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went. Okay, so the Edomites are subdued. Military posts are placed in its territory. And David commemorates his victory in Psalm 60. We need to turn over there for a moment. Psalm 60. Verses 8 and 9. It says, okay, Moab is my washpot. Over Edom I will cast my shoe. Philistia, shout in triumph because of me. Who will bring me to the strong city? Who will lead me to Edom? Is it not you, O God, who cast us off, and you, O Lord, who did go out with our armies? Give us help in trouble, for the help of man is useless. Through God we will do valiantly, for it is he who shall tread down our enemies. So here's David's recognition that the victory is the Lord's. Okay? He recognizes and he puts it into Psalm 60. It's interesting, it says, over Edom I shall throw my shoe. I'm not sure just what that means culturally.
Did you ever see George Bush was doing a presentation in the Middle East, and one of the men took a shoe off and threw it at him,
Oh, okay.
and he ducked, and there was a look of surprise on his face.
Okay.
It is cultural.
Okay. Yeah, it's an opposition.
Yeah.
So here it's talking about God throwing his shoe.
Yeah.
Okay. Historians believe that while David was fighting the Armenians to the north, that Edom attacked from the south. Okay. When you've got your army busy in one place, okay, in the northern regions, it's an opportunity for those in the south to attack. And so historians believe that that's actually what was going on here. But the Lord helped David wherever he went. See what it says here. So whatever army there was, I always think back to the things that have been going on in Israel over the last 75 years, and the Six-Day War in particular, how that there was no way that Israel could defeat its enemies, but except that God did it. Okay, and so it doesn't matter how many men you've got along your southern border if God is on your side. And of course, we've got the story in the Old Testament of the 300, right? Okay, and routed a whole army. Okay, because God struck fear in them, thinking they were being attacked by something much larger. Okay, all right. The defeat of the Edomites gave David access to the copper mines of the Arabah and control of the trade routes from the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, so Gulf of Aqaba, ships would come in there with their goods and send them up through Israel and up into to Europe, and so now they have control of two major trade routes. Okay. So I wrote here, what would David's victories mean for the nation of Israel?
One thing I'm thinking of is cash flow. Like these caravan routes, they would be skimming a little off the top, going and coming.
Okay. What happens usually at borders when you're transporting goods across a border? You tax them,
Yeah.
right? And so David had every right that these caravans that would come through is to put a levy on them for going through his territory, okay, for using the trade route, okay? And so it enriched the treasury of the Lord. Okay, it brought money. So the wealth of Israel is growing exponentially, okay? He's now got control of the copper mines. He's got the trade routes. He's already conquered armies and brought in the spoils and brought it into Jerusalem and put it in storage, okay? All right, other things here.
Safety.
Yes, I think that's the most obvious here, is the nation is at peace, okay? And they're feeling secure, okay? So they're prospering as a nation, but they also are at peace and living in safety, probably for the first time. I mean, think to all the time when Joshua brought the nation in. I mean, they had turmoil forever. It just never went away, because they didn't expel the Canaanites as they were told to do. And so they became a problem to them right up to this time. Okay? All right. So okay. Looking at a couple other verses, in back to 2 Samuel 8, verses 11 to 13, okay, we already read these verses. The point here was that all this material that was brought into the nation through the defeat of their enemies, it was then available for Solomon to use to build the temple. And that's laid out actually as a reference, if you're jotting it down. 1 Chronicles 22 gives that information. I don't want to read that whole chapter, but it's there in 1 Chronicles 22 that Solomon got all this material to use. Okay, going back to chapter 8, verses 15 to 18. Says, so David reigned over all Israel, and David administered judgment and justice to all his people. Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, was recorder. Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar, were the priests. Sariah was the scribe. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief ministers. So we're kind of getting his administration, if in a sense, his cabinet. Okay, he's got his cabinet here, and notice that he's got a good spiritual representation. Okay, on here with the priests being included in here, that he doesn't just use people who are gifted in politics and administration. He wants the spiritual side as well. Okay. How did David prove himself capable as king of Israel? From what we read here.
His loyalty to God.
Okay, yes?
And he seemed to have a gift of knowing which people to put where. That was God revealing it to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shows wisdom in the choices that he made, and the fact that they're all listed there, says volumes. Okay, that these were all these people. As we go through the rest of the story, these are all notable people. Okay, they repeat and repeat and repeat. So he had competent people in place in the administration. What does it say? How was his rule? How did he rule?
Fair and square.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Fair and square. It says here, he administered judgment and justice. So it was a very fair administration. Okay, he didn't take any nonsense. I think there could be some of that going on in our country these days. But anyway, so he administered judgment. So he had control. He really did have control of the nation. Okay. And notice the last part of that phrase, to all his people. Again, we see his servanthood. Okay, how he served the people. He's always realized that God is the one who put him in a position of authority. Okay, and so, and that he's there to serve the people, not his own purposes. Okay, does that make sense based on, I could be reading too much into that verse, but it seems logical to me at least. Okay, I wrote here, God used David to bring calm after the storm. A good ruler must appoint wise and skilled subordinates. Though David's nephew Joab treacherously killed Abner, as recorded in chapter 3, David still made him head of the army. Why would he do that?
It
He's
shows
not
him-
as skilled as a leader.
Because he's a skilled leader. Even though he did something wrong, okay, he was a skilled leader. And it could be that David had nobody else as skilled to put in that position. Okay? It says, I put it here, he saw his capability to administer in this leadership capacity. We know little of Jehoshaphat. The recorder or secretary was probably the one who kept the records and advised the king as a secretary of state would do. Okay? So he kept the minutes of all the meetings, in a sense. Okay? Zadok and Ahimelech were priests sharing the high priest duties. Sariah, or Shavsa, was a scribe. The word secretary indicates this. Benaiah was the officer over David's bodyguard, a mighty warrior. And if you look at chapter 23, that he comes up as one of David's mighty warriors. Okay? The Cherethites and Pelethites, this is interesting, were mercenary soldiers. Okay? Paid to protect David. It's thought they had Greek origins. They were faithful to David, not to Israel or the covenant. Okay, let's look at some verses here. 2 Samuel 15, verse 18. 2 Samuel 15, verse 18 says, Then all his servants passed before him, and all the Cherethites, all the Pelethites, and all the Gittites, 600 men who had followed him from Gath, passed before the king. Okay, so they had been with the Philistines. Okay, Philistines originally came from Greece. Okay, so you have these two groups of men who come out. If you remember, we have to think back, when was David actually in Gath? I mean, here's where Goliath comes from. When was he there?
He was hiding from Saul.
Yes. When
And
he
living
was,
in Ziklag. He was living in Ziklag.
yeah, but he actually went up and stayed in Philistine territory for a period of time and pretended to be a friend of the king of the Philistines. Okay? And
They even had him go out into one of their battles with them.
yes, yes.
But they wouldn't let him fight. They just let him.
No,
let him
the
off side.
general said, we don't want him coming with us because we get into Israelite territory. Who says he won't turn sides and fight against us? And so we're fighting out front, and we've got this guy behind us fighting us too, so they wouldn't let him go. And so eventually he went back to Ziklag. Okay? Yeah, that's where they sent him back to, actually. Okay? So, then going over to chapter 20, still in 2 Samuel, chapter 20, verse 7. Okay, well, okay. These guys, I forgot the names, the Pelethites and Cherethites, actually came out with David from Gath. So they aligned with him. It's interesting. They saw who he was, and when he left, when he came back to Ziklag, they went with him. Okay, so their dedication was to David. Okay, remember I said it wasn't to Israel; they were with David. They became his bodyguard, and they did throughout his reign. Okay, they come up. That's why we're looking at some of these verses. Chapter 20, verse 7. I got too many other things in between here. Okay. So Joab's men with the Cherethites and Pelethites and all the mighty men, went out after him, and they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba the son of Bichri. Okay, anyways, that's another story. We will get to that eventually. Okay, all right. And then dropping down to verse 23. And Joab was over all the army of Israel. Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Okay? All right. So Joab had no control over these guys. Okay? That David assigned Benaiah to oversee them, to be their general, if you want to put it that way, or commander. All right? And then going over to 1 Kings chapter 1. Okay, 1 Kings 1, verse 38. Okay. And Shimei said to the king, the saying is good, as my lord the king has said, so your servant will do. So Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem. Okay, am I in the right place? Let me see. No, I'm not. I'm in chapter 2. Okay. Chapter 1, verse 38. Okay, so Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the Cherethites and the Pelethites went down and had Solomon ride on King David's mule and took him to Gihon. Okay, so here we are. This is the reference to when Solomon actually is first crowned king, when David's son tried to take the throne as he was on his deathbed. Okay, but it's interesting that here we have these guys showing up again. So now it's as though their allegiance is being transferred from David to Solomon. Okay, so they go, and obviously David sent them to go to be the protection of Solomon, because who knows how all of this was going to fall apart. Okay, all right. And then going over to verse 44 in the same chapter. Okay, let's see where we are here. Okay. Oh, that's the verse I read. I'm sorry. 38 and 44. Okay, I think it's actually saying basically the same thing. Okay, then over in 1 Chronicles 18, verse 17. 18 verse 17 says, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief ministers at the king's side. Okay, it's always interesting. You have to, you meet somebody once in Scripture. It's important to go and find where they're mentioned in other places, because it fills in who are these guys and what were they doing, what was their role in all of this. Okay, and I wrote as our last statement here, David's sons served as officers in the government. So there were some of his sons that he trusted. They weren't all renegades, okay? All right, going on into chapter 9. Okay, perhaps we should read that, okay, and then we'll consider these questions. It says, Now David said, Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? And there was a servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba. So when they had called him to David, the king said to him, Are you Ziba? He said, At your service. Then the king said, Is there not still someone of the house of Saul, to whom I may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, There is still a son of Jonathan, who is lame in his feet. So the king said to him, Where is he? This is interesting. In the culture of the day, okay, Ziba could have been terrified at this point. Okay, why is he asking if there's anybody surviving from the family? Okay. Anyways, and Ziba said to the king, Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel in Lodabar. Then King David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, from Lodabar. And now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth? And he answered, Here is your servant. So David said to him, Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. Then he bowed himself and said, What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I? And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, According to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. So what would prompt David to reach out to Mephibosheth at this point?
He's the rightful heir to the throne in some ways.
Yes. Yeah. If you were following cultural tradition, that's true. He would have been an heir to the throne because Saul's sons are all dead, and so it falls to the grandson.
Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Aha. Friends close and enemies closer. Okay, yeah. Any other reason?
He was Jonathan's son.
Because he was Jonathan's son. What was the relationship between Jonathan and David?
Friends, best of friends.
Like brothers.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Best of friends, as far as going, say, if there was anybody that David would consider a brother, it would have been Jonathan. Okay. In our earlier studies years ago, I researched a little bit about Jonathan. We often think of Jonathan having been about David's age, but that's not true, actually. Jonathan was actually about 20 years older than David. Okay, so when David was in his teens, Jonathan was in his 30s, late 30s probably. We don't have an exact date, but when you look at the timelines, you can see that that's true, and he was in the army. Okay, and so he was really a mentor to David. Okay, so a very close relationship. And I should have looked at what the covenant was, because I wrote down here, he had made a covenant with Jonathan. Okay? Do you remember did anyone remember what the actual wording was that? But I think it was that he would care for any of his descendants. Okay? I think that was the core of it. All right? And so there's the motivation. Okay? Because of the covenant he had with Jonathan. There's another thought here too. We went right around it. When you said about keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, okay, I think David wanted to end the conflict between his house and Saul's. Okay, if there's anybody left in Saul's house, it's time to show mercy. Okay, let's put this conflict to rest. All right, and I think he's defeated the enemies around him. Now let's deal with any enemies, anything that's going inside the nation. Okay, we don't want division within the nation because that will destroy us. Okay, from within. Actually, that's always the most dangerous place. Okay, how many churches have blown apart? Okay, it wasn't the outside conflicts, it was the conflicts that were within the church itself that caused more trouble than those who stood against them on the outside. Okay, All right. So I wrote here, the events in this chapter take place probably about 14 years after the death of Jonathan, since Mephibosheth was then 5 years old, going back to chapter 4, verse 4. And now it says he had a young son, verse 12. Okay? Okay? That we just read. He's got a son. All right? And so he's now a man. Okay? He's not a boy anymore. He was about 4 years old when Jonathan died there on Mount Gilboa. Right. Verse 3, where it says, the kindness of God means to show mercy and favor of the Lord to undeserving people. Okay. I wrote this question: how does David appear as a type of Christ in this chapter?
Well, he's showing mercy to a crippled guy that really can't do anything for him.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like us too. Okay, we're, in a sense, we're crippled. We're crippled by sin. Okay, so we actually have a cripple. Okay. Yeah. Okay. There's a word that's used repeatedly in this chapter in reference to David.
The kindness?
No? It's okay, a title. There's a title for him.
King?
King. It's mentioned 6 times. David is referenced as the king 6 times in this chapter, and culturally, no one but the king could have shown this type of favor. Okay, so there's where you get the type of Christ. Okay, Christ being the king, he's the one who's offering us mercy. Okay, so the Lord has, I wrote here in my notes, the Lord will show us favor just like that shown to Mephibosheth. Okay, Mephibosheth even said of himself, he said he was undeserving. Okay, so Mephibosheth was undeserving of anything coming from Saul's household, David's enemy. Okay, we're back to that thought again. Okay, so here we have Mephibosheth actually being on the enemy side of things, okay, but he's undeserving of what David is extending to him. Okay. It says, like I wrote here, like David's covenant with Jonathan, we are the recipients of redemption because of the covenant in Jesus' blood. So there was a covenant between David and Jonathan, and there's a covenant that we are a part of because of Jesus' shed blood. Okay? And lastly, I put down, David made the first move toward Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth didn't reach out to David. If anything, he was trying to stay as far away from him as possible. Okay? And so he was in Lodabar, which was about as far away as you can go. Okay? All right. And that the Lord is the same with us. Because we know the scriptures where it says that no one seeks after God. Okay? We're actually God's enemies. And it's God who reaches out to us to draw us to himself. So here we have David demonstrating how he was a type of Christ in this befriending Mephibosheth. And actually, again, here's the other part of that. He brings him right into the house. He brings him into the court. And he sits him at his table. Okay? And that's what we look forward to, okay, in our future.
Like
Okay.
we're the sons and the daughters of Christ then, like, because, yeah, same thing.
Yes, exactly. Sons and daughters of Christ. So in a sense, Mephibosheth becomes a son. Okay? He adopts him. Okay? It was Jonathan's son, but David has, because you don't sit at the king's table, okay, except by invitation. And the fact that he now is going to reside there, he's not just visiting. I mean, if we got an invitation to be at the palace with King Charles II, okay, we would go there for maybe for a banquet or something, but we don't stay. We don't stay. We're not adopted. No, we're just visitors, okay? Mephibosheth was brought into the family, okay? I alluded to this already. Could Ziba have been suspicious of David's search for descendants of Paul's family, or of Saul's family?
Likely, wondering, okay, what's going on?
Exactly. But it's interesting when he's asked the direct question, who is it and where is he? Ziba doesn't hedge the answer, does he? He tells him exactly where he can find him. Well, maybe Ziba's had enough experience in the nation to know, don't lie. Don't try to hide it, because it'll get you. Okay? All right. So, I don't know if we have time. We've got about 5 minutes left here, but we can start into chapter 10. Okay. I said to refer to the maps on the following pages. So there's a whole number of them there. Okay. I got the titles of them. Okay, when David was a fugitive, it appears he was able to find asylum and protection among the Ammonites under Nahash. Okay, verse 2. So we're in chapter 10 now, verse 2. I thought it's interesting, just another thing here, is that David has conquered Israel's enemies, okay, and then it continues in chapter 10. And the whole thing with Mephibosheth is kind of just dropped in the middle. Okay? And I thought that was interesting, that David, in the midst of all that he was doing to bring security and safety to the nation, he's still very much aware of the people. And in this case, particularly descendants of Jonathan's and Saul's families. Okay? All right. Chapter 10, verse, let's just start at the big one. It happened after this that the king of the people of Ammon died, and Hanun his son reigned in his place. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun the son of Nahash, as his father showed kindness to me. Okay, so here we have that situation. I wrote here, when David was a fugitive, it appears he was able to find asylum and protection among the Ammonites under Nahash. When Nahash dies, his son ascends the throne, and David attempts to secure peaceful relations with him. Okay. It would take us longer than what we have to continue here. I'm going to pick this up. Go ahead and read chapter 10 before next week, and get your reactions to what transpires here. You may already be familiar with the story, and then there's a bit more after that, and the maps at the very end of that chapter. I'm just not sure. Now that we didn't have kids club this evening because Karen's ill, I imagine they'll have kids club next week instead. And then they probably won't have it on the 20th. Okay. So I am thinking that next week may be our last week before Christmas. Christmas week may be too busy. What's your take, folks? If we had a study on December 20th, is that going to be too crazy to do something that week? I'm just getting your feedback. Nope, not a problem if we did? Okay. All right, we'll see. All right. We may go ahead and do it. If we can get up through chapters 11 and 12, that's not a very long section in there, even if we just got into chapter 11. The thing is, the reason I mention this is because of my responsibilities starting in January as a tax preparer. The months of January through April are just, I'm buried, pretty much, okay?
Do you want us to help with the taxes?
No thanks. I'm not doing it.
Peter's already told me that he's not available. So, he said last week, anything having to do with finances, no way. Okay, so I'm not sure whether next week will be our last week or whether we'll meet on the 20th, but I'll let you know when we meet next week what we're going to do. I don't want to get to a point where we're kind of halfway between something and then we're breaking for until mid-April next year. I like to have a nice cutoff point. So we actually got further than I figured we were going to this evening, so that's good. All right, thanks for coming, folks.
So John, who do you think between Jehoshaphat and Sariah, the secretary, which one of them, or did they both keep track of all the stuff that was coming in? Like the bronze and the silver and the gold and stuff, like somebody had to keep track of that.
Yeah.
Which one of them did it, you think?
We said that one of them was kind of acting, was it Sariah that was acting more as
Well, it says secretary.
a secretary, so he would be more in the meetings to record all the political stuff that's being discussed, where Jehoshaphat probably was more in the keeping track of the wealth, if you want to
Okay.
put it that way. At least that would, because there's two, the division of labor isn't really completely
Yeah.
defined,
No,
except that for Zariah, it seems more that they're there at David's, there at David's side all the time to keep record and take the minutes and that sort of thing.
because one of them his job also would have been to keep track of who died in a fight and who didn't. Would that not have been one of their jobs too? To keep
Yeah,
track
that's
of-
right, yeah, they'd have to keep track of who's in the army and
Who didn't come back?
who didn't come back, and to report to the families and affected, and, yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, it's not spelled out
No.
very much, we're just told that these guys are there, and David entrusted them with a lot of the administration that was necessary for the nation, so. Okay. But they all seem to be a part, like I said earlier, they all seem to be a part of his cabinet. They were his inner core, and so they were very much overseeing the nation alongside of David, that he wasn't doing this on his own, which was a wise thing to do. And the fact that he had the two high priests who were sharing responsibility in the cabinet as well speaks volumes of his intention for the country. Okay. All right, thank you.
Where'd you get this?
I don't know how you make it go.
1973.
Yeah.
This thing's in good shape.
December. Yeah, you still are? Yeah.
I'm in tomorrow.
You got one of those?
I'm taking regular shifts.
Wouldn't you be a vision
Regular
driving
shifts.
downtown wearing one of those things?
Okay, yeah.
Because I was
Tom, look at this here. You've got a
So somebody goes
snowmobile
over there,
magazine from 1973.
or do you have people
Well, 2 days a week.
2 days a
What do
week?
you
2
think?
days a week. So Tuesday, somebody's
You and Donna had lovely.
3. Tuesday, somebody's
Yeah,
in
I gotta,
till 3.
I should take it,
And
I own my
then
phone,
Thursday,
I'll take a picture of that,
someone's
show
in
it.
from 11 to 1.
Get it for Christmas.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like I've never
Which one did you
asked
have?
you anything about it, so I just kind of wondered, like, how does that all work, Is there somebody there every day?
No, we don't have somebody there every day. We don't have that much traffic. So if people, we have
440. Yep, we're fine.
an email address and we have telephone numbers, so
Okay, so then,
people can make appointments to come in, and they know when we are open, they can check that out.
Don't
And
break
we've
it.
got it right in our window,
I see.
so then they'll drop in.
So then, actually it takes care of, I guess maybe none of my business, but then, like, it makes me wonder when it's not open that often, then how do you pay for
So
the
you still got it?
space?
No, I know where it is. I read the hat.
You're the treasurer. Yeah, so,
We
but,
have,
but
we
like
have
I'm talking
donations.
Right.
rent or donations.
All donation, yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that, because I was thinking, holy cow, how do you pay for your rent?
It's all donation. The Catholic Women's League
Well, let's go
supports
get it right now.
the
Oh,
Birthright.
oh, Probably more you know.
There's a thrift store up in
Yeah, maybe.
Walkerton
Yeah.
that is
I
run
don't know,
by
I've
them.
never seen one
And
called
so
Owlette before.
Well, I never
knew